Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin, here with the ever-energetic Teos Abadias. So, Teos, how are things going this week?
Oh, things are going great, Shawn. Yeah, I'm having an absolute blast on this Monday. See, what am I doing? I did a lot of looking at monsters, and that was kind of
Mhm.
inspiring. And I had an amazing game of Deadlands on Friday night, where I
Uh,
really had to ponder why is our group so much fun? Like it was that good a
yeah,
session. It's just like I don't know, whatever we're doing, let's not mess with it because boy, we had some rollicking good times. The players have these really excellent characters, and they're doing all their things really well. It's all interlocking into complete absurdity and fun, and yeah, it's great.
that's great. I got the chance to run 2024 officially for the first time, running a playtest of an adventure that we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
Uh, but I played some obviously with the play test and all the things that they were doing up till the release. And I've played with the new rules, but I haven't played with the new rules and new monsters,
gotcha.
official
Yeah.
monsters. So got to do that this weekend. I had heard that power levels are much different than they used to be. I can say at second level, I haven't seen that yet,
Okay.
but so far so good in terms of expectations of how difficult things are going to be.
Weapon masteries behaved. It was all reasonable at the table.
It was a little silly, but it was okay.
Yep.
And speaking of silly but okay, let's talk about our listeners. Our listeners are all okay. Some of them are a little silly, but not the people who write to us. They are generally very serious. So we're going to take a couple of those emails right now, starting with Tentacles Squelching Wetly via our Patreon Discord. Do you have recommendations on how to evaluate the best return on your invested prep time when balancing the effort required in creating adventure handouts or props with their impact on immersion, particularly when distinguishing between essential clues and more flavor type pieces? Have you found that the time required enhances player enjoyment and storytelling significantly, or are there alternative methods such as more detailed role playing notes for NPCs, environmental descriptions, or other types of pregame prep that should take precedence when the goal is deeper immersion into story and setting? We'll cut it there. And what did you have to say on this, Teos?
I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think an important thing is to think back on the last time you were prepping or the average time you're prepping. And, are you finding yourself doing something like madly trying to finish that handout, but you also haven't prepared some part of what you're going to run tonight? That's a clear indication that you're spending too much time on handouts, right? And there were this person, Tentacle Squelching Wetly, shared on our Discord awesome examples of, and you can see it in our show notes, of the handouts they've been creating, which are amazing.
Yeah.
And so if you're spending this is all, to me, this is all the cherry on top, right? You
Mhm.
want to do all the things that are a great session. And then if you have time and inclination, desire, it'll pay off for you. Creating awesome handouts on top of that just takes it to that sort of next level category. Same thing with things like, the right minis, awesome terrain, any handcrafted anything. That's all extra, but the rest has to be taken care of. I'll stop there. What do you think?
I think that one of the joys of using published adventures, especially ones that come with these great handouts, is that you don't have to create your own. And usually, since they are made by a publishing company or an accessories company, they're usually very well done. I'm not terribly visually oriented, so handouts never have done a great deal for me
Oh,
unless they specifically represent something that my character would need to know or see in the game. So
mm,
remember Tomb of Horrors and White Plume Mountain when they
yeah,
had that little uh, art pack that came with them?
yeah,
And so you, as the game master, could describe the room and then show a picture of the room.
yeah.
And people raved about those at the time, how great they were, how amazing they were. And for me, I was just like, yeah,
Oh,
okay. I But
Huh.
where my mind went was I could already visualize it based on what the DM read. And so I'm looking for like, okay, there's art here, so there must be a clue, right? There must be like in the corner, there's a mace on the floor, right? And that's the thing. That's the thing that will get us through this encounter. So
Yeah.
I was looking for that sort of stuff when it was really just here's a picture of the scene, which for some people is everything. And for
Well,
some
I love
people
that.
means absolutely nothing.
This makes me think of the art pack for Barrier Peaks. There is a
Right.
picture that I can imagine when my DM showed it to me that has like a column, and then it has what looks like a buried laser pistol.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, oh, I'm going to find that. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't think that's there. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's in the art. And like, so that was totally that sort of like, I was looking for that payoff. And I think that's
Exactly.
a really good point that you make of the payoff
Yeah.
will vary by player.
Mm-hmm.
But also a lot of times, or let's say it's easy to fall into the trap as DM where the payoff is being actually made for you. I
Right.
love my art project. I'm doing my art project. And it's really important for us as DMs to remember the payoff is for the players. This is why you're doing this handout. And so it needs to be tied to the rewards they will get, right? If
Right.
I think of why Blade Runner's handouts were so effective, is that those really beautiful pictures that they include in there are things that reinforce the setting
Mm-hmm.
and pay off for their actions. Like you describe the scene, you look at this thing, and then you get a picture when you ask for details, right? I
Right.
want, is there a way that we could track the car? Well, you could try to enhance this image and you flip it over and like, oh, there's the license plate, right? That sort of thing.
Yep.
That kind of payoff is obvious to the players, right? Like
Yeah.
we are better for the handout. The handout was a reward to what we chose, that kind of thing.
What I try to do if I make a handout is do have a payoff for myself as the game master,
Sure.
which is what are the things that after I read the box text or describe the
Yeah.
scene, the players are going to keep asking me over and over again.
Uh,
If I know that, oh boy, every 5 minutes someone's going to say, what was that NPC's name again? Or how many pillars were there? Or what did the puzzle look like? If I can get a handout for that, then I am
yeah,
doing
sure.
myself a favor by not being interrupted by the player asking over and over and over again when I'm trying to focus on something else. So I like to have, as you say, that payoff, but that
Yeah.
payoff both in terms of story, but it just in terms of running the table more effectively.
Yeah, and something we talked about with the examples that were shared on the Discord, that they're pretty dense. And so,
Mhm.
to me, those kinds of handouts, where it's sort of like lore information, right, journal pages, that kind of thing, those
Mhm.
are actually really great to deliver towards the end of a session, so
Mhm.
that folks have something to look at in between sessions. Because I
Yep.
find that anything bigger than like a paragraph of text, at least half the players will not really read it. Or there'll be
Mhm.
that one player that's like me that will
Yep.
consume this avidly, and they may tell everybody, and that's fine. Because
Mhm.
if you have
Mhm.
that player that will read it and translate it to everybody into a bite-sized chunk that everybody hears, that's all good. You've just really given a big payoff to that player. But if you really want everybody to read it, it's better done in between sessions where
Yeah.
you have more chances that most of them will go back and read it just to see what's really going on here.
And if you have a note taker at the table, someone who loves to take notes on NPCs and treasure, and they love that part of the game, giving out handouts short circuits their fun.
Mm,
And by saying, here's a list of the NPCs that you've met in town,
yes.
you sort of take that person wants to make their own notes and wants to be the person that says 3 sessions later, oh yes, we met that dwarf carpenter in town, and they were the ones that gave us that
That's true.
special vision that they had, and so
Yeah. Yeah. So you
it
want
can
to
be
help
handy, but
them
think
or
about it.
give them
Yeah,
what they will use as fuel if you have that person. If you don't have that person, then yeah, then that becomes helpful.
right.
Yeah. So you tailor it to your players like that. And that's I think the biggest thing is just think about the time that you're using for prep and what's effective, right?
Mhm.
Mike Shea does a really nice job of breaking that down. Like, you don't want to forget about character goals because you were making a cool stained map, right? Because you could just explain where the location is, right? And watch your players. It's hard to do because we hate to sort of assess things like that. But watching your players and seeing whether they seem excited by this or not and comparing that to the amount of time you spend, I mean, I would do things like mass combat systems or whatever and try these things out, and everybody would say like, yeah, that's great, don't do that again.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
Or we like the other stuff better, theater of the mind with this like neat system, and they'd be like, that's cool, could we have Dwarven Forge next time again?
Yeah. And say, Dwarven Forge, same thing with sort of maps or tactical maps is if you're going to run a combat where it's going to last 2 rounds, you don't need a big detailed tactical map for that. But if you're
Right.
running a combat where there are 4 different combats within this one location, you may want to take the time to make that map, which will save you time, late down the road.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question. We're going to take another question here from NorCal Bowhunter 3264 via YouTube. This is going back to the Shadow Dark shows, but makes a good point here. Asks a good question. An issue I have, and this isn't just Shadow Dark. I've seen this advice in a lot of other spaces. It's just roll when there is only roll when there is a time restraint or danger. Isn't this always true in a dungeon? You have rounds, and every X rounds you do a random monster check. So theoretically, there is a chance that while you are trying to pick a lock, a monster shows up. And isn't there danger of breaking your lock picks? And now you can't open the door, or you accidentally trigger a trap, which is a possible danger, right? Even in a city, the argument could be made that a guard could walk across a thief trying to pick a lock. So that's time pressure threat issue as well. It seems to me more like the intended advice is only to have players roll in combat. Otherwise, I feel the time restraint and danger advice is too vague. And this is a good question because it gets to the gist of a game design philosophy that really people are talking about when they say only roll when there is a time restraint or danger. And that philosophy is true of fiction, stories as well. And that's only trouble is interesting. If there are no consequences for a failure other than not succeeding and staying at this static state, then what is the point of the check?
Right.
So let's think about this example in a dungeon with a door. Let's say the door is trapped and locked. How does your game expect you to handle that? What do you want a game to do to handle that? Because the answer to that question will change depending on your play style, what you want out of your game, and then you can decide what game might be best for you. So we'll take this example. There's the door. Your party's looking at it. There are 5 characters in your party. How do you want the game to handle that? Do you want only one person to be able to make a check to find traps on the door? Do you want them to be able to retry if they fail? Do you want every single person to be able to try? Are there consequences if they fail? Are there consequences if they fail by more than a little? Now, you found a trap. Same question. Can only one person try?
Mm-hmm.
Should everyone be able to try? Should you be able to retry if you fail to disarm the trap? Should there be a consequence for if you fail or fail by more than one? Now the door is, you've cleared the trap and now it's locked. All right. Should more than one person get a chance to try to, you see what I'm saying here?
Well, and also I think to part of this question is whether each of those attempts are counting as a sort of magical, like a clock tick.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
So things are going to happen if you have too many ticks, which I think is a big part of what's being discussed here, right?
And so let's say we're going to make a dungeon delving, very time sensitive game where, yes, you can retry as much as you want, or anybody can try again. So let's say all 5 characters need to search the door to find the trap. There's 5 ticks.
Mm-hmm.
Then every character needs to try to remove the trap. There's 5 more ticks.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone needs to try to pick the lock. Okay, there's 5 more ticks.
Better like random encounters if you're going to go down that road.
Exactly. So now you need to decide how many ticks until there is automatically an encounter, or you get to roll
Check.
randomly for an
Hmm.
encounter. Because if you roll randomly after every 3 ticks, you could be rolling 5 encounters there at that door.
Yeah. And then you might have 10 doors in the place. And yeah.
Precisely. Now, you can say, well, that's the game I want. And that's the challenge of a consequence for the players. But if you give characters experience points for
Mm.
every battle they fight, every monster they kill, every gold piece they get, now you're actually not penalizing the players and their
Right.
characters for having those random encounters. You're actually giving them 5 times the experience and gold, assuming
Hmm.
they survive, that this other group had, who got everything on the first try or somehow used magic to bypass the door completely.
Yeah.
So now you have to say not just how many checks and what are the consequences, but you have to look at your experience point
Yeah.
system of your game. That's how integrated these
Yeah.
questions are.
And that's
Right.
why Shadow Dark
So
is really clever, right? With
yeah,
what it does. It's got the torch, right? And
yep,
darkness is bad. So,
yeah,
you don't want to run out of your torch. The fewer times that happens, that's good. You stay
yep,
in initiative so that you're all taking turns.
yep.
So generally things are moving through, and there's this encounter check process and the torch. So there's this pressure. But there is also this advice of, hey, sometimes you can just pause and resolve things because we're just in a room talking, or we're,
Yep.
resting or discussing options, or checking out the door, and maybe we don't care to do that in initiative order, right? And so it
Mhm.
has a little bit of that freedom to pull off of that system when you want, or when
Right.
you suspect this would be a problem, right?
Yeah. And none of those games, none of those options that are in those games are wrong,
Right.
but they could be wrong as they're integrated into the whole of the game, or there could be wrong for a certain play style. And so you need to keep all the things in mind. And another question that comes from this is, for a skill system like 5e D&D has, should the thing that I just talked about, the checking for traps, the disarming the traps, the picking the lock, use the same sort of setup that other skills use for doing diplomacy, for making a medicine check to diagnose a disease? Or should they be different? And if they
Mhm.
should be different, then should your skill system actually be different so that certain skills allow retries, certain skills don't? Certain skills make ticks of the box, certain skills don't. Uh, you, 5e tries to have the skill system one
Mhm.
size fits all. When one size really doesn't fit all, even the game doesn't want one size to fit all. So
Yeah.
it's a challenge to try to think of all the ways that you might use skills, allowing rerolls, having consequences for failure, etc.
Yeah, and there's a gameplay angle to this as well, where if your players feel this pressure, they will have a certain type of play coming from them, right?
Hmm.
And that will shut down what can be really fun when you have the freedom to just sort of go back and forth and try things, discuss things, do silliness, right? Like that is obviously time consuming, but they're going to do this and talk about their character. My character starts coiling the rope this way, and because that
Hmm.
would be a tick on the clock. But we're not following ticks, so they can have the freedom to do this sort of silliness, and we can go back and forth or do some elaborate plan without worries. Um, there is something to that can be really nice, and also to, like, I'm a believer in actually having lots of roles.
Hmm.
I like rolling. I see rolling as engagement, but I'm not
Hmm.
saying every DM should do this. For my style of DMing and the way that I talk to my players and develop a rapport with them, they learn that these things will happen, right? That I will say to them, well, based on your question, make me this sort of a check. And then I will
Hmm.
make up in my mind, based on sort of how they did and what I know about their character, what they kind of learned. And the reason I do that is
Hmm.
I want them to be constantly touching the game. I want them
Hmm.
engaging with it. And I don't want them to worry overly about it. So I want lots of checks and interactions. I find that people rolling dice gets them into the game. So I want to see more and more of that. So I am constantly looking for roles and things. But
Yeah.
I also don't allow 20 people to open a door. And so a game like Deadlands, where it does a nice job of saying there's a help system, and one of the players is actually very good at the table, she will often say, well, I'll help you with that. And sort of takes that help slot, right? And it reminds everybody at the table, oh yeah, we shouldn't just jump in and everybody do this. Someone can take the lead and someone can assist, and that's it, right? And so so everybody kind of falls into line that way. And that ends up being a really nice for our group, right? That works really well.
Yeah. That whole there should be consequences for every role it's a good mentality to go into the game design with. But as I've said so many times, that D&D is a great game with a storytelling problem, or a great storytelling game with a dice problem. And one of the consequences of a failure can just be the story. It can just be okay, you failed to do this. Nothing in the world changes, but the story that comes from that, we are going to have fun with, or it will be dramatic, or it will be sad, or it will be ridiculous. And that's a completely fine reason to have a die roll, because the story, the things that we tell and joke and talk about at the table will change because of that die roll.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right in that rolling the dice is important to keep people focused and to keep the game in mind, as well as everything else that's going on around.
There was a great player I played with in third edition who played a bard, and he would, like most bards in third edition, make bardic knowledge checks about just about everything. But when he would get it wrong, he would come up with whatever he believed was true. Here we are in the desert. Oh, these are the tracks of ice trolls.
Yep.
And everybody would say, ice trolls? Oh, yes, they're very dangerous. They fade over time, but why? But they're very cold, so they last quite some time. These are their tracks. And we were like, okay, we're all tracking ice trolls. And the DM would just go, what is happening? We'd have a blast, right?
Yep. Yeah. Getting things wrong and having the players play that up can be an incredible part of the game.
Yeah.
I think we should jump right into news. We have a couple more questions, but we'll get to those next week. We want to talk about our news and commentary section, starting with Diamond Distributors filing for Chapter 11. Why is this important to us, Teos?
Well, distribution of how the books move around is a big, complex beast, and it's like the hidden engine you don't think about, right? You go to your local gaming store and you pick up a book and you go, great, but you don't think about the fact that there are all these steps taking place of how that book got there. And these are all lifelines for various parts of the industry. Diamond is best known for distributing comics, but they also distribute books and games and toys and miniatures and all sorts of stuff to all kinds of stores of different sizes, including your local gaming store, but also other larger places too. Convention suppliers, you name it, all kinds of places. And when they file Chapter 11, that means they are running out of money and they are facing imminent failure. So they are asking for protection against their creditors, right? They owe money and they want to continue to operate while they attempt to fix it. Because the idea is, hey, everybody in let's say the United States is better off if we don't pay a bunch of people we owe money to, but remain solvent, than if we collapse. And we'll talk about sort of the whys of that. But that's kind of what's at the heart of this, right? This is an engine that runs a lot of our industry.
Okay. And so what happened? Why did they have to file Chapter 11?
Well, so this comes from their approach during 2020. And Diamond has sort of bad and good sides to it, reviled and hated in some ways over the years, but also admired because they often do things like let small businesses sort of accumulate some debt so that they can get going and then pay off and so on. So there's positive and negatives to them. But in 2020, during the pandemic lockdown phases, Diamond made the decision. The other thing that I should say is they've sort of propped up the industry and did it by saying, well, we will take exclusive deals. If you just deal with us and we distribute everything, you comic book company, right? Marvel, DC. We will be your only distributor, but we will kind of run all this expensive stuff and handle the industry of moving all this around. And so companies largely said yes to this. But in 2020, when the pandemic was shutting down stores, Diamond said, we're going to lose money on this, so we're not going to distribute. We're not going to ship new comics to stores. And if you're Marvel and DC and other places, you're like, I'm sorry, that's how we make money, and you have this obligation. You've got to do this. So what Marvel and DC did is cut ties with Diamond as being exclusive and began to find other ways to distribute. And so other companies grew up, some already existed, and this began to happen where other groups were there and no longer exclusive to Diamond. Diamond lost a lot of money on that, and it's only increased over time as more and more companies have ceased being exclusive or found other ways to do it. So here we are, and they're finding out that they've probably not changed the way they operated, right? Probably an expensive way based on this previous way that they're making lots of revenue. Now they're not, so they owe a ton of money.
All right. And so what is there a way out? Is there a RPG industry tie-in here?
Yeah, there absolutely is. So Diamond owns what's called Alliance Game Distributors, which is the tabletop game distribution subdivision of Diamond. And what they've said is, as part of this restructuring, we're going to sell that off. And so far, they have a $39 million, what's called stalking horse bid from Universal Distribution. And the idea, what that means is that if nobody else beats that bid, they will get Alliance. So it will be sold. We know it will be. If someone bids more, Universal will get sort of a payoff for the fact that it wasn't them, because they kind of came in, but they set the floor, if you will, for sort of bidding on it. So someone is going to own it that isn't Diamond. So that's already a bit of a shakeup because you don't know what's going to happen with this. The other thing that's a big deal for the industry remains to be fully seen of how it's going to play out. So one of the things is we talked about these creditors, right? This is all happening because they owe a bunch of money. Well, to whom do they owe that money? So the biggest one is Penguin Random House. Diamond owes $9.2 million to them because they function as sort of sub-distributor of publishers, where Penguin Random House is sort of the primary behind it. So, Penguin Random House is looking at losing tons of money, more than they make in several years, probably in the comics and other tabletop areas. They also owe a ton of money to Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. Wizards is a bit over 910,000. Hasbro is just over $1 million. They owe NEC, the company that owns WizKids, about $2.7 million. So if this bankruptcy goes through, a lot of these companies are not going to get paid, either partially or in full. And so you're looking at a company that, say owns WizKids, losing $2.7 million out of nowhere. Will that change how WizKids sell things? Will it change how Wizards or Hasbro do things? Maybe, right? Hard to say. And the last bit of this is how it impacts stores. We have a Discord member, thank you. Don't know if you wanted to be named or not, but they are an active participant, and they actually went around, did some legwork for us in a major metropolitan area, spoke to a number of different stores, and they all actually seem to feel okay. They have a mix of distributors, and they weren't expecting major impacts. But it's possible that some stores where they're kind of doing this sort of like, I owe you money, Diamond may actually reach out to them and say, you've got to pay up now. So it may put some pressure on some stores, and stores may find themselves changing distributors, and they'll have to see how this, once the RPG part gets sold, how that impacts things. So this may take years to sort of play out its full effects, Shawn.
Interesting. All right. Thank you for that. Ray Winninger, former head of D&D at Wizards of the Coast, went onto a podcast with Stan, the RPG designer and artist, to talk about a variety of things. Stan has a YouTube channel where he interviews Wizards staff, current and former. This obviously he had Ray on this time. We've talked about Ray before. He managed the D&D team for about 7 years into 5e before leaving. Kyle Brink, who Teos interviewed on this show, came to lead the team after that. And Mike Merles was the previous head of D&D before Ray. Teos, you were there at this, and you were actually feeding questions into the chat. What came out of this interview with Ray that you found interesting?
Oh, there were some really, really great parts. As a buff of history that I am, I was buffed. +2 to all my history checks. Ray said the goal that management gave him was to double the size of D&D in 5 years. And again, this is 7 years into D&D, this is 2021, right? When he's coming in 7 years in, and he's being told to double the size, but they actually did it not in 5 years, but in 3 years. And he says, I'm not going to take credit for it. The game was already on an upswing, but just shows you how, often management gives you a goal that you can't hit, right? Or you have to murder yourself to hit. And they did it in less time, which is something else. He also said another piece about growth that I found just astounding. Quote, we were selling about as many players' handbooks every year, this is 5th edition, as were sold for most of the whole 3rd edition era. So every year selling about as many players' handbooks as in all of 3rd edition. That's incredible, right?
Yeah, that it shows the growth of the game in ways that we've been trying to show, but people haven't quite been grasping.
He talked about how every edition before 5e would have a fantastic first couple of years, then sort of gradually taper off until it would hit a point depending on the edition. But 5 years out, 8 years out, whatever, where the sales have dwindled enough that we really have to do a new edition to sort of pump up the sales and start the machine all over again. That never happened with 5e. 5e, the core book sales just increased every year all the way up through my whole tenure, right? So that's just incredible there. And he discusses a number of things because Stan asks, so why did it grow? And he has a couple of things that are interesting. He talks about sort of trying to shorten the campaign time, and Stan sort of says, well, actually we had surveys at Wizards that said the average campaign was shorter than you're saying it was. So they had an interesting back and forth there if you're interested in that kind of topic. Ray said a big growth was the diversifying audience, which is something you and I have mentioned all the time. And the way he broke it down quite simply was, it used to be 80% male. And at one point, he said it was essentially 50-50. And that's basically doubling your audience, right?
Yeah.
And Ray, and Ray also said YouTube broke down tons of barriers, right? All of a sudden, people who wanted to play could just easily learn how to do it and where to get started and all of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he came up with that was a sort of different way of saying things that I really appreciated. He said when 5e debuted, D&D was a kind of a low point. And he says, I liked 4th edition. I thought it was a terrific game. But we're sort of at this low point. And Wizards dramatically scaled down the size of the D&D team and sort of, divested from D&D. I'm quoting here. There were actually real serious questions about, at Wizards, are we still going to make this game? Like, is this a business we want to be in? And so a serendipitous thing that arose from that was that Wizards made far fewer D&D products because the team was so small, they could only manage to get a couple of products a year. What they discovered relatively quickly, 2 years into 5e, is that we're selling way more copies of those couple of products than we used to of those giant, during the height of my freelancing at TSR, there were 60 products at least every year.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we theorized on as to why sales were so strong. And we still get pushback from people saying, well, if they had put out 10 more products a year, they would have sold 10 times that because everyone would have. But I think this hits the nail on the head of they didn't even do it on purpose.
Right.
But it showed that it's a strategy that at least in the time period that they did it, worked very well.
Yeah, and Ray just really says like these extra products were done back in the TSR days and 2nd edition days, 3rd edition days, even 4th, were just cannibalization, right? Eating up each other's sales. And what he really breaks down that I had not thought of in this respect is that there's this publishing term where you have a front list driven business. And the bulk of your sales are what you just released. So he says, and then if you publish too much, you're just killing off those sales because people are only paying attention to what's at the front. So he says, quote, the typical life cycle of a D&D product would be 60 to 90 days. The book would come out, it would be around in the stores for a month or two, sales would sort of then drop off, and it would more or less disappear unless it was a very major, something like the Forgotten Realms box set. But most of the releases, that's what would happen. Right? That's amazing. In 5e, it was a backlist-driven business. He basically says 30% of the sales every year were new stuff. The rest was the old 5e products. So
Right.
the bulk of your sales are coming from your backlist, which is awesome because everything new you make becomes part of that and just keeps selling, right? And he points out that during his tenure, like nothing really went out of print. They just kept making it because it kept selling. And when you think about that 60 to 90 day drop off versus it keeps selling, and all I could think of was, oh, I would kill to know what is happening, say, last year. Like, what did last year look like or the year before that? I wonder if it's changed back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It would be fascinating to know whether it has changed to be a front list driven business again. And if you could ever untangle why. Or maybe it's just still doing well on the backlist, but it's different. Or, you get the feel it's changed. And I'd love to know how this plays in.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to dig into, but I want to stick to what Ray said here. Did he mention the OGL at all?
He did. I had to ask something about it, and they didn't quite. In fact, they kind of laughed about. We're not going to answer the questions that were asked. I had to. It's a good question, and people are a little uncomfortable about it. Is the way I look at it. But what they did, but they gave me more than I'd hoped for, and thank you, Ray and Stan, for that. And they also said very nice things about our podcast, which thank you for that. But on the OGL, Ray said what started to happen was that D&D became so successful at Wizards and at Hasbro that it started to attract a lot of attention from other parts of the company. And you and I have talked about, right? We had this time, I remember, where one of the quarterly results came out and Hasbro said, D&D and Wizards are going to teach the rest of the company how to operate. And I thought,
we both went, oh, that's not good.
Right?
That's not good. Yeah.
And they said, and so Ray continues, one of the points of contention was the OGL and the role that it played in the overall ecosystem. And then he kind of distanced himself and says, I was not a fan of the OGL, and that he was pleased with how what he said was reasonably quickly how they altered course. Unfortunate how it rolled out, but that they were able to kind of recognize this is a big misstep and let's undo it. And I certainly heard that, from my contacts, it was issue 1 at Hasbro for a while, right? And they were working hard to try to solve it once they realized that they had stepped in it. And he says, this is the nature of large organizations, and that both D&D and Magic the Gathering are very strange businesses. Like they're not a thing you can just explain to a random executive who comes in. It's a very complicated thing, and even the people in it have trouble understanding how it works. So it was a fantastic watch. So you can look for Stan and his YouTube channel or follow the link in our show notes. Anything else, Shawn? I know this is right up your alley.
No, this is all great stuff. The other thing I want to add is that's why when Wizards hires new vice presidents or vice presidents, even if they're coming from games, it's usually digital. Right, it's usually coming over from Blizzard, coming over from Microsoft, but the games division of Microsoft, and it's a completely different animal. There's nothing like tabletop role-playing game publishing because it's not really publishing. It's not really games. It's not any of these things, and it's all this big mess. And so people coming in thinking, well, I know games. And I know business, and I've got my MBA, and I've been vice president 4 different places, and I've been the president here. It's completely different. And all of the lessons that you learn in those other companies, not only do they not apply here, but sometimes they're the complete opposite.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like that whole idea of, hey, maybe if we only have, a couple of products a year, we'll sell more, right? And even though 5th edition started that way, we've seen 5th edition try to accelerate the number of products, and it has not seemed to pay off. And at least with the data that I analyzed, we talked about this on the show, but when I broke down the numbers from BookScan with the help of our Discord folks, we saw that, yes, there was some volume increase overall, but it did seem to have that effect of each individual product is selling less. It isn't just open up the spigot, put more streams of water in, you make more volume. It's not that simple. Some of it begins to cannibalize, it seems. And it reflects what you ask, when you ask fans and they say, I can't remember what was released last year or in what order things came out, or I only used one book the whole year. You start hearing that.
Otherwise, really bright people cannot seem to grasp that creating a book costs something.
Mm.
Publishing a book costs something.
Yeah.
It's not just if you make it, you will instantly make more money. You
Yeah.
may make more money overall, but there is the cost of making that money.
Yeah.
So it isn't just make a book and you're better off for it.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it's not that during fourth edition, people didn't want more martial power abilities, but there's a
right,
reason martial power 2 didn't sell well.
right.
Right. And it's complicated. It goes back to that whole thing we're talking about, but it's just, you give people too much, it eventually starts hurting itself. Right. And yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it isn't settings like it was in second edition, it still has that effect. And then I think, hopefully fifth edition can figure it out going into the future so that we continue to see this growth that benefits everybody. We'll see.
There you go. We got more news on the Legends of Greyhawk organized play campaign. There were two articles that went up on D&D Beyond a couple days ago, one by Chris Tulloch and one by David Barker. And they have more information both on this campaign and what's going on in Chicago at the end of February, where there will be a preview at MagicCon for this new campaign. What did we learn from Chris Tulloch's article? There were 5 sections. The one was called Preparing for Adventure. We know that the campaign will be set in Seaway 576, which is the same as the year detailed in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, and that the 2024 core rules will be used for this campaign. What do you need to do to create a character? They tell you how to go to D&D Beyond, what toggles to turn on, what toggles to turn off. So it's just going to be the player's handbook or free 2024 rules right now for character creation. They said that you will be able to customize your origin, which is something that's talked about in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And you can use a standard array or point buy to get your ability scores, no evil alignments, and the campaign, at least at this point, will start at level 1. The adventures in this campaign will go from 2 to 4 hours, generally aiming for about 3 hours. And there may be information in the adventure that will allow you to shorten it to 2 or expand it to 4. And we get this quote: characters will reach level 2 after one adventure session and level 3 after another adventure session. Advancing to levels 4 and 5 will require 2 adventure sessions. And then from levels 5 to 10, characters advance after every 3 adventure sessions of play.
And I'll
High
note
level
that
character.
that
Yeah.
that basically matches the type of advice we see um, in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yep.
I'll be curious if the levels of play go higher, whether they go to what the DMG says. The DMG actually surprises me, says that later it speeds up, so your higher levels go by really fast. And so I'd be curious whether they will do that or not.
Yeah, there's been, over the years, as you know, Teos, there's been a lot of introspection on what's the best pace for a campaign of this nature. And so we've seen from you need to play 4 or 5 adventures to go up a level, way back 3rd edition, 4th edition days, to level after each adventure if you want in
Yeah.
other campaigns. So this seems to, as you said, follow that Dungeon Master's Guide advice of let's get to 3rd level quick. Then we'll slow down the pace a little bit, and then maybe at the end we'll speed it up
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
Uh,
So it'll be interesting to
they
see.
they yeah, they do say
Hmm.
that higher level character advancement and additional features unlocked with play will be covered in a future update. So either they're still working on it or they're saving that for later. What about treasure and rewards? Because that's another huge part of creating an organized play campaign. They
Yeah.
say that you select one of 3 options. And what are those options?
So I thought this was really interesting. Like, normally it's sort of like, oh, you get X gold plus a magic item. But here you can choose gold, a featured magic item, or roll in an adventure specific short table for a random magic item. And that's kind of neat. Though I wonder if there's some base gold either way or because, usually you need some cash to go around. But I thought that was a really interesting, this idea of choosing through those 3.
Mhm. And there will be some conventions that will have convention exclusive magic item certificates that can be traded.
Mm.
So we've seen this before. Uh,
Hmm.
the first thing I go to when starting a new campaign is how do they handle magic items? Because I've seen the effects of too I'd hate to use the term liberal because it means something politically, but too liberal magic item giving generally takes a toll on the campaign a couple years later. And so it will be interesting to see what magic is given at what points when you get characters or players taking magic items in this campaign so they can trade it to a different character,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it you start to get into some weird territory. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
Uh, if you want to look at some of the upcoming Legends of Greyhawk adventures, Bald Man Games will be bringing you a special event at MagicCon that will give you a glimpse into convention play for D&D in the near future. Uh, there will be 3 adventures that will be running at MagicCon for level 20 VIP badge holders. They can get other exclusive events, including 3 epic campaigns, but the adventures for this particular campaign will be a village called Hamlet, Darkness and Nulb, and Ruins of the Moat House.
Ooh,
So
classic.
if you are a Greyhawk fan, an old school gamer, you will recognize
Hmm.
all of those things from the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign.
Still my
I
beating heart.
I I think I can say that I wrote Darkness and Nulb, and some of the other designers. If you said, like, name me your top 10 convention organized play designers, these people would be on that list.
Hmm.
So, a great list of designers to kick us off here.
I know I
And
saw
again,
Eric
that
Menge's name somewhere there.
Eric Menge wrote A Village Called Hamlet. Some Marx guy, of course, maybe
Haven't
some
heard of them.
Doyle
Who
gentleman
are those
worked
people?
on it
Never
as
heard of
well.
their names.
Yeah, never heard of them. So all of that is there. There are 2 D&D Beyond posts, and then the MagicCon website will have further information on when all of this runs. Whew. So tell me about the grad student who's using Critical Role transcripts to train a dungeon mastering AI.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a joke or something, but it's true. So a graduate student, I guess, published last year a sort of experiment they did, and what they did was they went out. You have to kind of follow the chain of these things, but basically they went out to fan sites that have created data around from transcripts of Critical Role actual play sessions. So this is fan created, and the transcripts name each player and what they say, the dungeon master, and so on. So they took
Mhm.
that and used that to train an AI, along with the Sunless Citadel adventure created by Wizards of the Coast. And the experiment then aimed to have the LLM run the adventure for you based on what it had learned from how Critical Role all play together. This Critical Role dataset contains about 160 episodes and apparently has been used by other LLM projects as well. This is all from a Polygon article, and they didn't say who, what, but potentially for profit. When this was at least just an experiment at a university level. And all of it raises the question of what is ethical use, right? What is copyrighted and at what point is it owned? Critical Role owns their show, of course. Well, what happens with a fan transcript, and can someone just take that? And it isn't exactly clear. I mean, I can tell you what I think, but there are a lot of lawsuits that are still ongoing on this topic, right? And I don't know, when D&D talks about, or the CEO of Hasbro says something like, we're going to train AI on, well, what are they going to use, right? And is somebody out there going to create a product based on essentially stealing copyrighted information and using it? Who knows, right?
Mhm. Yep. So we will, as always, keep an eye on this issue. And if it's dark when we're keeping an eye on this issue, we can use some new minis from WizKids to see what we're missing. You are the minis expert, Teos. Tell us about these glow in the dark minis.
Yeah, this is the first time that WizKids has introduced this in their 44 mini set called Underdark Expeditions. It will feature a new, quote, dungeon glow effect. And yes, they made that one word and they removed the W. And they are so happy with how clever a name Dungeon Glow is that they have trademarked it. So I thought that was
Okay.
funny. I laughed for quite some time, but that's how I spend my evenings. This quote adds a glow in the dark dynamic to select parts of the figures, and it's available in a variety of colors. And the idea is that different parts would glow in the dark. We know that the gelatinous cube, myconid, gas spore, beholder, and green slime all appear to have the treatment. There are probably others as well. Those are just the ones either named or shown in pictures. Personally, whenever I try to like dim the lights, nobody can see what the heck they're doing, and it just is disappointing. So I basically never go with a low light situation. Mood may seem great, but you got to see what you're doing, and just
Yeah.
so I don't really need it. But
Teos, if say one of the minis was a flump, would you turn out the lights then just to glow, bask in the glow of flumpness?
I mean, yes. Well, it means that it has to go in my bedroom, and I think we signed in our contract for wedding that if
Yeah.
it's a glow, if it's a flump, it's anyway. I don't know
Yeah.
where I'm going with this joke. I'm going to stop now, but I definitely will be buying this set because it does indeed have the third ever flump mini from WizKids. There is also an unpainted version, but who's keeping count? Oh, I am. But yes, it has a flump in it, and so that makes it an automatic must-have, at least for that one mini. But otherwise, well, we'll see how it does. They did separately say they are, with the Monster Manual having all new art, they have a set of minis also coming out that will be based on the Monster Manual to have, the majority of those or a good number of those captured in the new art style, and they've already been having new dragons with that art style, which maybe you like.
So what I'm envisioning is a glow in the dark mini, like an adventure holding a torch. And if you shut the lights off, the torch glows in exactly like a 30-foot emanation. So if it's on the map, it just shows what's.
I
I don't
love
think
it.
we're to that level of glow in the darkness yet.
I wonder if they thought about adding something with it, like an adventure with a torch or just a plain old torch mini. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's wrap up with our creator corner here, talking about Dragonlance encounters under the shadow of the Dragon Queen. Command the invincible armies of the Dragon Queen Takesis in this collection of encounters for Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. This project features some members of our Discord, led by Megan J., writing from Chad Lynch, Jeff Mueller, Raymond Jenkins, and John Ryan. What does it include? It includes a 47-page PDF containing 24 one-page encounters, 4 for each chapter, plus 4 bonus encounters for Chapter 4, The Shadow of War. 18 colorful and thematic maps with gridded and ungridded variants. You can download those as zip files. And 9 monster stat blocks to add to the Dragon Queen's ranks. What will players do in these adventures? They will infiltrate the Red Dragon army camp, threatening Volgar. They will hunt for spies inside the walls of Kalaman. They will counter the maneuvers of the Green Dragon army in the east, explore new locations in the northern wastes, investigate Lord Soth's dark designs in the ruins of, I can't pronounce that, Anyari, and engage in deadly aerial combat with the Ace Dragonel Rider, the Red Ruin, in a redesigned encounter. This all on the DM's Guild for only $8.99. Link in our show notes. Some great people designing that and looking forward to it.
I also saw, Shawn, that MT Black just released an adventure that I think he might have kickstarted for. It's now out there,
Okay.
so maybe we'll have that next week, but I'll just mention it now for folks who want to go looking for it.
Okay, you know where to find MT Black stuff, so check that out. That was our news and commentary section. I hope you all enjoyed it.